Hello, hello, and thanks for joining me once again for another Azure Synapse Analytics update. Now, it is August 2022, and we're looking back the month of July and saying, what happened? Anything big happen in the month of July in the world of Synapse Analytics? And the answer is, yeah, there's a few interesting things. Now, obviously, for my cold, sparky heart, the GA of Spark 3.2 is huge. And there's another sneaky little update that's part of the move from preview into GA, which is actually quite important. So we'll step into that probably first thing when we get into the meat of things. There's also a few improvements to Data Explorer. There's a really nice little ADF thing where there's an ADF, like a data factory thing, where you ever happen to use a data factory inside of VNet. I don't know if you've ever done that, you know, like most people all of the time. Then you're going to like this change. So a few nice little things we can take a look at. As usual, we'll get the release notes, we'll step through, I'll talk about what that means to me and why I care about it. You don't have to care about it. You might care about lots of things I don't care about. We will see. As always, if it's your first time around here, don't forget to like and subscribe. Say hello down in the comments. Let me know which of these various updates are the ones you actually care about. You know, it's always good to hear these different perspectives. Right, let's go and have a look at the release notes and what's going on. Okay, so got the official update blog up and out. Again, do recommend you go and take a look at this yourselves. And there's, as always, Ryan from the Synapse team has done a bit of a roundup video himself, talking about that from the Microsoft Teams perspective. So I do say you should go and watch those videos just to make sure you get kind of the Synapse Teams viewpoint on all these things. And then we've got a list of all the things we're going to talk about. Now, as of course, top of the list is the move up to Spark 3.2. Now, again, Spark is an open source platform. So kind of that has its own release cadence, kind of moving at its own speed. So the support of Spark 3.2, essentially just plugging it into the Synapse Spark pools. And that comes with a load of features. There's a ton of things that the open source community have built into the 3.2 version of Spark, and that's got really, really good stuff. Now, the big thing for me is this move from preview to GA comes with a move up from Delta Lake 1.1 to 1.2. What does that mean? Why should I care about that? I hear everyone cry. It was actually a super big release. So 1.2 had a load of stuff baked into it, which is just great for performance and just the way Spark works. Load of really, really good things in there. So before we talk about, you know, I'll touch on the 3.2 ones. We've done that in a previous video, so it's just to go in GA. But I do want to talk about 1.2 because this is new. So Delta Lake 1.2, if we jump over to those release notes, we get this page. And then this is the open source list of everything that went into the open source Delta Lake project in the 1.2 release. So there's a few things about multi-cluster writes, that kind of thing. This is a huge one. So the open source flavor of Optimize is pretty big. So this is when I need to switch over to a whiteboard to talk about what this does. So here we are talking about a Delta table. So we've got our nice Delta table, and that's got its Delta log in there, and it'll also have a load of Parquet files. Such a bunch of files sitting in my Parquet. Now, if I'm reading lots and lots of those files, that might be fairly slow. Maybe I'm streaming in here and I don't just have 4 files, I've got like 400 files, and they're all really, really tiny. Now, Parquet works using column store compression. It compresses better the more data that is in that file, up to the point of getting to about 1 gig of data. So the more data that's inside a file, the better it compresses. But if I don't have control of that, if I'm just writing lots and lots of files in there, there's not really much I can do. So this file compaction, what it is a job. It's just like an update statement that we can run on our Delta table, and it'll look at it and go, "Ooh, actually, these files are really, really small. What I'm going to do, I'm going to mark these files as invalid in my Delta table. I'm going to make a nice new, better compressed file." That's it. That's what it does. It's a bit like defragmenting an index on a SQL tape. It's a thing you need to do occasionally if you've done lots of small inserts, lots of little micro updates to a Delta table. It's going to have loads of small files in there. You run an optimize statement. It grabs all the small files. It goes, cool, that's now a historically obsolete version. Here's a nice, chunkier, better compressed file. That's it. And just having that in there is just a huge, huge big difference. We also have this. So file skipping based on column statistics. That's another weird one. So Synapse has always been able to do a flavor of this. But essentially Synapse kind of assumes it's just plain old Parquet. So if it's coming in here and it's, get rid of all my little thing. Let's do that again. Let's go entirely clean, make a nice new load of Parquet. Right, there we go. So if we've got our nice files coming in here. Now, because it's Parquet, it has statistics built in. So each file will have like a minimum max for so many of their columns, for all of the columns, in fact. However, in order to look at that, decide whether or not I need to read this file, I need to actually open the file, read it, have a look at the statistics inside it. And if I've got thousands and thousands and thousands of files, that's not very efficient. What Delta does instead is Delta actually captures statistics up here in the transaction log. So I could have just one JSON file that says, for these 4 different Parquet files, that one goes from 1 to 10, that one goes from 1 to 15, that one goes from, I don't know, 2 to 20, and this one goes from 20 to 40. Just the minimum maximum from an arbitrary column. Maybe that's our customer ID, and they're the different ranges for our customer ID that we have in those files. Now, when a query comes in, and everyone says, well, I want to select star, where it's equal to customer ID. So my customer ID is equal to, I don't know, let's go 30. Just by checking my transaction log, I know I don't need to read that file, I don't need to read that file, I don't need to read that file. 30 is between that minimum maximum range for that file. So there's only one of those files I need to read. And it does that based on the transaction log, which is just a tiny bit of JSON, which is way more efficient than actually having to read the stats from everything that I ever open. So from a sheer performance point of view, from an amount of data you read point of view, all just so much better. So again, we can now use column statistics. Be aware, Delta only keeps stats on the first 32 columns by default. So if you want to have more, you can tweak that in the config. But to be aware, adding more means it's slower. Kind of up to you, depends on what you're doing. It does mean you end up with some weird things in Delta. So when you're doing performant Delta, you front load the columns you might filter on at the start of the table, even if that might not make sense to the users who are looking at it, but you do it for performance. So it's in that 32, so it gets those stats. Yeah, just loads of nice little useful things. We can do generated columns. So if you want to have not actually store the data, but have it calculated, you can actually do data skipping based on this. Lots of good things in there. So have a look through the Delta 1.2 changes. Most important part, that is part of the 3.2 GA. Okay, other bits we've spoken about. So we've spoken about the Pandas API, adaptive query execution. Go look at the last videos if you want to see what was going on there. Just a load of changes that went in Spark 3.2. Okay, I'll stop. Intelligent cache is now generally available. Essentially, this is an auto caching when you're reading from an ADLS Gen 2 lake. Again, if you're going back to the same bit of data repeatedly, by default, Spark will just treat every single execution of a data frame as a slightly different, well, as an entirely different job. So if you said, get all that Parquet, and then read it and put it to there, read it, show it to me, read it, give me a summary of that info, and then put it over there, that would go back to the data 4 times and just read it entirely from scratch. Now you can force caching inside Spark. You can say just persist this or cache it, but then you have to manage that and you have to manually say that. So this is just automated caching, which they've had a flavor of inside of Synapse Spark pools before, but now it's going GA and it's going to be enabled for 3.1 with 2.2, which is pretty cool. Other bits, 2.4 is officially retiring. It should have done a long time ago, put it out of its misery. Again, it's just all those good points of modern Spark. Any Spark after version 3 is using a load of really good performance things. Joins are a lot better. General performance is a lot better. You don't want to be using 2.4 anymore. So going into a full official retirement cycle. So you got 12 months. If you're currently using a load of Spark pools and you haven't upgraded it yet, you got 12 months to get your stuff in order so you can go and move away from it. But you should be moving away from it anyway. Come on. Years old now. Okay. Away from Spark. I'll calm down a bit. So a few more things in Synapse Data Explorer. So Synapse Data Explorer, that is our time series analysis thing, originally coming from our various different log diving, log explorer kind of systems. So we have a new process where we can have a connector going from Stream Analytics. So Stream Analytics is the nice SQL-based streaming engine that we have in Azure. So we can say, read from an event hub, read from any kind of messaging source, apply a SQL query to it to transform that data, and then put it into a variety of destinations. One of those destinations is now an Azure Data Explorer or a Synapse Data Explorer database. So if you've created a database for Azure Data Explorer, you can use that as a destination and then stream data in there and then be querying that database using Data Explorer. So that's now in there. You can go and have a play with that, have a look and get more details on that, which is pretty cool. And the other one we've seen kind of in the previous month, we saw some changes in terms of the ability to do sort of dashboarding, some graphs. We can make some pretty charts when we're kind of querying things using Data Explorer. And there's another little update for there, which is actually quite handy, where if you've got a load of stats coming and you've got several different metrics that you've kind of got as your y-axis across a time-based x-axis. So if you're looking over the past 12 months or 30 days, whatever your time period is, and you're saying, well, actually, here's our normal numbers, here's our kind of count of that threshold, here's our minimum in that period, all those different measurements you might be doing. You've now got this ability to say, actually, I want to create a separate chart for each of these measures, and it'll kind of just replicate the same one. So you can kind of define a single chart and then say, actually, I want to do a Y split. I want to create a split, make a separate chart for each of these metrics, and then push it out. Again, super useful. Didn't mean to click on the picture. All good. Okay, and also the other thing, so if you're not a fan of that, so having to actually type out your charts and kind of build out your charts programmatically, they've made it a little bit easier if you just want to use kind of a little graphical wizard. If you want to kind of just go, I want a new chart on this x-axis, this y-axis, that kind of stuff. So you can now go and build that. I don't know why they're rendering so badly, but we can go and have a play and build out these charts without having to give it some data and have it infer the structure from the data. So you can kind of plan these things out in advance, which is all quite nice. Again, more improvements in that Data Explorer side, making it just easier to use, more accessible, is all great. Just makes sense. And there's the sneaky data integration side of things. So I mentioned if you're working in managed VNets, and honestly, loads of our clients are working in managed VNets now. If you're trying to do integration work, if you're trying to do orchestration in a load of things that are inside a VNet, and you want things like your Spark engine, like your Lake, or your Key Vaults and all that kind of stuff to be behind your own VNet, which honestly, most of our clients do, then you need to, these days, far easier if you just put Data Factory in to use a managed VNet. Now, one of the things is whenever it spins up its own bit of compute, it kind of sits in queuing mode for a while. And occasionally you'll be sitting there and it's going, hey, it's just queuing. Just waiting for it to do a thing. So now they've implemented the time to live for that queuing. So we can say, well, actually, once we've queued for the first thing, just leave it there because we're going to come back and use it a load more times. Don't bother having to queue for every single activity in there, which just makes life a lot easier, basically. So things we can do in there, which is really, really nice. So you're having a play with that. You've now got that time to live, which just means it leaves the compute turned on for a given period. Now, be aware, paying for that. So be a little careful with it. But again, just nice. Makes a lot of sense. A lot of SAP connectors have come in. So if you're using SAP BW, using SAP HANA, using any kind of that SAP family, there's a load of additional connectors that have been implemented. So you're trying to suck data away from that. And there's a load of templates they've put in. They kind of just make it easier to get data out of that system and into Azure to then use inside Synapse and start querying the data, start playing with things. And it's really nice that they're kind of put the CDC elements in there as well. So if you're looking to automatically pull changes out, I've not had a deep look into it, but actually does look very, very interesting. We've certainly had clients in the past who've had SAP and said, how do these things talk to each other efficiently? Because you can go and just suck the data out. But how do you just do changes? How do you do an upsert? How do you do change data capture? And having a pre-canned template with those connectors can make life a lot easier. So really nice. Okay, another one. So Synapse Link for SQL works a bit differently than other Synapse Links. So Synapse Link for Cosmos, it had its own little hidden secret lake, and it would always be just like constantly keeping up those column store files updated inside Cosmos DB's own analytical lakey thing, and we just suck away from that. Synapse Link for SQL basically just picks data up and just constantly throws it into a dedicated SQL pool. Now people are looking at that going, oh, that means I'm paying for some kind of runtime to be doing that ingestion, but I'm also paying from a dedicated SQL pool to always be turned on while this replication's happening. And that's expensive. Or it just means the scaling doesn't work, or I need to manage things. It's another thing I have to look after. So one of the things I've put in is a batch mode for Synapse Link for SQL. So essentially, you can just power this up on an interval, maybe hourly, maybe 5 minutely, depending on what you want your interval to be, and go, right, get any changes that have happened since then and move it over. So it's just more flexibility, more options. If you're using SQL Server and you want to be pulling data automatically into your Synapse Analytics, you can use Synapse Link, but now you have a bit more control in that you can say it's either continuous, which batch-based. It's batch-based, you can have that, whatever the interval is, turn things off afterwards, keep things nice and cheap, just use it for when you actually need to use it, which makes a lot of sense. Okay, we've got another change. So the Synapse Notebooks are now fully compatible with the Ipython kernel. This is kind of funny, because over on the Databricks side, they did something really similar only about a month or two ago. So it's good that we're just generally seeing this convergence of all the various different managed Spark providers going, yeah, we should actually just use the main primary open source one, so we have a common standard. Just makes sense. Great for us as users of these things. So now that switch has a few things that it means. So moving over to Ipython means there's a load of just built-in magic commands and functions and things that just are now automatically available. And also means you can do some funkier stuff in terms of some of the outputs and the rendering that actually come out of these notebooks as you're using it. So there's a few things. There's loads of things they can do in terms of magic commands. You can also register your own magic commands, which is actually just interesting. So if you're looking at where people are doing, like, percentage PySpark, percentage Scala, or Spark in Synapse, and you've got all these various different magic commands registered, you can create your own ones. So if you want to make some real common functions for your users to use, and you want them to be able to do it magic command style, you can now go and build your own things and then publish them and use them, which is actually really cool. We can do debugging. So this is part of that better syntax highlighting. So in this case, if they had an error, there we go. So there's an error there. We can look at that. We can go, Spark sessions now. Right, okay, where's that? And it's quite hard to see where actually that went wrong. Create one data frame. Okay, it's probably that line, but you have to kind of infer it by reading. I don't want to read things. There we go. We can do stuff like that. So they can say there's an error and it's highlighted the line in the cell that actually went wrong. Just really useful. It's kind of what you'd expect from any IDE, right? But yeah, great little improvement. Great thing for just improving the development experience in notebooks. Auto completion, so kind of type down is a lot better. So as you're typing in things, it's just going to automatically give you a list of libraries, and you've got a load of extra libraries because they've been added in from the Ipython kernel. The stuff you can do in there. So means some other stuff. We certainly saw kind of on the other switches, we've got more interactive widgets. There's other libraries that are commonly compatible with Ipython that we can now use in this Spark environment because of that switch over to that Ipython kernel. So yeah, really good. Just a good thing to be doing. Okay, we've now got a stop method inside MS Spark utils. So essentially, if you have a Spark pool and you've got people all competing and fighting for space inside that Spark pool, but there's a session that someone stopped using, but they just haven't stopped that session, you can now do that programmatically. So you can have it so you can run a script, you can run your entire Spark notebook, and at the end, it will go, right, I'm now done. Please stop using the Spark session. Please free that space up, give it back to the rest of the pool. Again, you can now do that. Again, just MS Spark session.stop. So if you want to, at the end of your script, deliberately and explicitly release those resources, just pop that at the end of all of your various scripts. And yeah, that'll make sense. Cool. All good. And then finally, there's been a few changes in terms of the Git integration. So you actually sort of need to switch it around. Not actually sort of looked at this one yet. Should have read this one beforehand. So previously you needed actually more permissions. They've reduced the permissions that you need in order to be able to publish into Git. That should make sense. So actually, not going to be a breaking change then. So what you actually need to do is go back, review who you've given access to, who you've given that Azure contributor role to, and actually you can probably strip that away and just give them the Synapse artifact publisher role. So you can actually tighten up security a little bit, strip it back from people who you've given too many permissions to, so they've only got permissions to actually do things inside Synapse, not contributor on the entire Azure resource. Makes sense. And that's our list. So loads of things in there. Again, good range of things that we're actually seeing. And obviously I'm happy when it's a Sparky one. Obviously I'm happy when there's loads of things going on. For me, obviously one of the biggest is the move up to Delta 1.2. Loads of things that actually means. but actually just some nice quality of life things across the board. Just generally making Spark notebooks a little bit nicer and easier and more functional with the introduction of the Ipython kernel. More things we can do with Data Explorer, and actually making the charts and graphs easier to build, a little bit more accessible to people who aren't necessarily going to know how to actually build out the KQL to actually do a rendered dashboard. It's nice. It's just bringing it a little bit more accessible, opening it up to people, and just making it easier to use. So yeah, that is all I wanted to go through today. As I said, I'll put the link to their release notes down in the description below. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know which of the various different features are your favorite. What are you liking? What do you want to see it going? It's always good to hear. Alrighty, until next time, cheers.